information.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So, first of all, happy Monday, everyone. Hopefully, you all had a good weekend. The sky didn't fall out from above you, even though you might have felt that way when you heard about the settlement. But I wanted to touch base with everyone. Lee had kind of called me and asked me if I would mind kind of giving you my opinion. And so I want to make sure it's clear that while I do have like a legal background, I am a lawyer, I am not speaking from that kind of perspective. I am an agent just like you all. I'm a broker at the East Nashville office, and I also sit on the Greater Nashville Board of Directors. All that to be said is not everyone knows this is just a proposed settlement. So while we have a lot of facts and a lot of things that we can expect to come to fruition, it is a proposed settlement. So that means there's still going to be some things that have to be worked out. There's a lot of, from a guidelines standpoint, that has to be worked out. So we're going to get a lot more clarity over the next couple months on a lot of this stuff. And ultimately, the judge could decide not to agree to the settlement. That being said, the expectation is that they will, because it benefits both the consumer in settling up these class action lawsuits, while also kind of readjusting and making sure that concessions were made by all the parties involved. So for those that aren't familiar, a few years ago, there was a class action lawsuit. This one was called Burnett, and it was on behalf of sellers who had felt as though the National Association of Realtors, along with all the major private players, so you're thinking Remax, Keller Williams, Berkshire Hathaway, Compass, that they had worked together in collusion to price fix, so to speak, that we were setting commission standards at 6%. You're going to see that in all the clickbait headlines, that all of this was an industry standard, that we had all worked together in some evil collusion factor to try to force people to pay more money, and thus it caused sellers to lose money. It made home prices rise. I think we all know that despite how the headlines say, that's not the truth, and that NAR settling this matter was not an admission of guilt in any way. This is simply because with the amount of litigation going on, as well as the Department of Justice is currently looking into just kind of the practices inside of our industry, you would think they have better things to do, but right now we seem to be right on their radar. So with all that be said, this settlement was an attempt in sorts to kind of both mitigate some of the fallout that might happen if they were to allow these lawsuits to go forward with these really large settlements. And it also will allow for NAR to work with the Department of Justice in making sure that we're making the type of corrections that will benefit both the consumer and our industry, and make sure that people are extra protected, and that we're not, that no one in any situation, whether it be us in our profession or that the consumer themselves is being taken advantage of. Yeah. And so what that means is on Friday, as you all probably saw, the NAR did settle. So already before this, Remax had settled, Keller Williams had settled, and Away had settled. So those are your three major private brokerages. Just because they settled this lawsuit, the hope is that it will cover most of these. There are still tons of litigation out there that is still open. So when we say that this is kind of putting things to bed, just know that you're probably still going to hear of other lawsuits, other things that are happening, and that the hope is that by doing this settlement, that we will be able to kind of consolidate all that, and the judge will kind of rule in our favor, and we'll move on and back to business as usual. So as you all heard, and you see in the clickbait things, the settlement, the way it came off was that no longer will a seller be required, even though they were never required, to pay a buyer broker compensation. So this is the major changes we're going to see in our industry. The biggest one that we're going to see is just the fact of how you go about setting up your buyer agency agreement, how the MLS is structured, and the way it advertises. It does not change actually how you do your business, right? One second, if we could mute Crystal. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so ultimately for most of us who've been going about business, as we always have, when we go into a listing agreement, we talk with the seller, we talk to them about what our value is, what our value proposition is, and with that, what our fee is when it's related to that service. At that point, we used to have what was called a cooperative agreement that was also part of the listing agreement, that you would then say, part of my fee is that I'm going to also share part of that if a buyer agent is also representing someone in the transaction. That will no longer be the case. Okay. The seller and the buyer's compensation agreement are now going to be two separate things. So what that means is you're most likely going to have to work into an offer your buyer compensation. Moreover, before you can show a house legally, you will be required to have a buyer representation agreement that has what your fee is as a buyer's agent. What that means is you cannot go show houses until you have that agreement signed. If you do, and they decide to buy without you doing it, you're not entitled to that compensation anymore. So to protect yourself, moreover, you should be doing buyer agency agreements from the outset as in practice already. And if you aren't, you need to be working on that. That is definitely a nuanced conversation that is different than having a seller conversation. It's a lot more difficult in making sure they understand why they're having to come out of pocket for any type of expenses. So start working on that. But what it means is you set your value. The guidelines we're getting currently, meaning there's still going to be lots of best practices. There's a lot more lawyers involved trying to get this all straightened out, is whatever you agree to with that buyer is what you will be able to be paid. If the seller is offering more than what you put in your buyer agreement, you do not get that. You are getting what you have come to an agreement with that buyer's agent. They are the only ones who now control what you get paid. So if your fee is 1%, 5%, 3%, that's what it is. If the seller is not offering that amount of compensation or any compensation at all, the buyer is required to pay that per your buyer agency agreement. Again, you don't have a buyer agency agreement and you show a house and the seller says, I'm not paying, even if it says it somewhere else, you're not getting paid. So that's the first thing. The next one, MLS will no longer show any form of compensation to a buyer's agent, period, full stop. There will not be a field. It cannot have mentions of it. That is something that you will have to negotiate, just like with everything else we do from a listing agreement side, with either the seller, the seller's agent, or your buyer. What that means is you're still going to be paid relatively the same ways, right? So a seller could say, I'm going to offer up X amount of compensation that they will tell their listing agent. Just let the listing agent know, or let the buyer's agent know, we're willing to pay X%, or we're willing to pay whatever. It just will not be stated on the MLS. As agents, it is important that we are educating our sellers on the value of offering buyer compensation, right? We want to make sure they understand that the value they get by increasing their buyer pool, by having where they know that they can pay, because again, it comes out of a net or some other version, the buyer is still paying that by paying whatever price they're looking for, right? So we always say a seller's paying the compensation, but really when you think about it, prices, everything, all of it gets wrapped up. The seller's net is what they're worried about at the end of the day. So you establishing your value as a listing agent needs to also include that education about what's important about having a buyer agent involved. What does a buyer agent prove in value-wise, whether it be through inspections? We all know the headache when a buyer is unrepresented and you have to go through an inspection period with them, right? That there's nothing worse than trying to walk somebody off a ledge if they don't have any type of professional advice to do that. Through appraisal processes, through just contract negotiations. All of those things are important to educate your seller on so that they see the value in offering compensation to a buyer's agent. That offer of compensation just will not be put on the MLS, right? So again, doesn't mean it's not there and that the seller cannot offer compensation. It's just cannot be part of the open MLS network. You also still have the option as a list agent, you establish your value in your listing agreement. How you use your commission is how you use your commission. If you have a value of 6%, 5%, 7%, 9%, a flat fee, if you choose to pay a buyer's agent a certain amount, that is up to you because you own your commission just like you always have, right? It just no longer in the listing agreement will have a cooperative commission section. There won't be this dedicated thing that's going to where they show how that commission is going to be used. Lastly, buyers can pay buyer agent commissions. I want people to understand it's always been that way. We just always, maybe whether you get scared, you think it's hurtful. And honestly, as we made the arguments in the lawsuits, this is the part that isn't pro-consumer. When we are forcing people to come out of pocket because we cannot wrap them up into loans, which who knows what'll change down the future about things like that with this kind of lawsuit. But at the end of the day, if a buyer is willing to go out and purchase a home, they have to understand the associated costs with doing that. This is all that is. It's an extra step that you need to take. So what does that mean? It means you need to be having buyer consultation appointments from the outset, just like you do when you go to a listing and you do a listing presentation. It means you should have a portfolio, like a listing presentation, but it should be directed towards buyers. Show what you do as an agent when you sign up with you as a thing. So that way, that discussion is already over with. So that hopefully, if the seller is offering compensation, it all becomes moot. But what you've done from the outset is you've established your value and what they're paying for from the jump. So that way, when we get to that point, no one, doesn't matter who's paying you, everyone understands why you were deserving of the amount you're getting paid, whether it's from the buyer or whether it's from the seller or whether it's some form of commission that you're splitting with the listing agent. As we go forward, all of this is going to take place in mid-July. So you have time to prep. This is not something that's going tomorrow be like, again, the sky's falling. None of you are going to lose your business if you continue to act in the professional ways you always have. If you're able to establish your value and actually able to establish what it is you do from a listing side and from a buying side, your business should go along. NAR feels, I feel personally as a top producing agent, that this shouldn't have any bearing on your income producing opportunities. What will change is now the public has an eye on the conversation. They're going to be more knowledgeable in those discussions than maybe they had been in the past. That's not their fault. We should be doing a better job, and that's how we got in this situation, in always educating our buyers and sellers on what a realtor does and why we get paid what we do, right? There's states already that already had these rules in place. Northern California already dealing with things like this, and they didn't see any drop off in their member participation, right? It wasn't like all of a sudden the next day there were less agents out there. You have plenty of states that the MLS is open to the public. It's not something that just is controlled by a realtor. Those agents are still in business. Essentially what has happened by doing these things is they've kind of turned us into a commercial real estate light, is what you call it. In commercial real estate, they never have offers of compensation up on any type of MLS service. It is always a negotiated point between all the parties involved. Guess who still is in business and really makes more money on average than a residential real estate agent? A commercial real estate agent. But what they had to work on and what they've gotten good at is always knowing where their value is, their value prop, and how to negotiate that. So here are the things that you should be doing. First and foremost, if you have not gotten your ABR, your affiliate, your buyer representation licensing, you need to. It is being offered all year long by NAR for free, 16 hours of education for free. If you did it a while ago, it would benefit you to still go ahead and do it again. If, let's see, if the ABRs in your associations, they might be offering it with CE too, which would even be better. But even if you don't get the CE, it's worth doing so that way you have that kind of skill set. You cannot downplay how big a deal. The biggest thing that you're going to have going forward is your negotiation skills. So get the negotiating expert certificate. NAR offers it on their site. That is something as a lawyer previously and also just getting better in business. I will tell you, one of the biggest things that I think is my stronger, attribute to another person is my negotiation skills. But even I feel as though this is a time that I need to be honing that in, because everything is a negotiation and it always has been. It's just now all the agents in here and all over the world are worried as though they're not going to be skilled. You are skilled. You have been doing this for years. Most of you have probably been doing this business for over 10 years, and there's been more changes every other 5 years. This is just a new hurdle that we need to navigate. On top of that, if you want to, I would start doing, whether it be with your focus groups, with your office, start doing practice buyer consultations. Spend time in understanding how to sell yourself to a buyer. It is just a different conversation. You aren't just someone who shows you around in a car and shows a house. There's 174 other things you do between the day that they come and call you and say, hey, Jack, I want an agent, I want to buy a house, and the day they close. And as we know, half the time they never even get there because it's so much involved. So make sure the people out there around you, your friends, your family, make sure they're champions of our industry. Educate them on what the power of a realtor is, how we increase value in home ownership, how we protect home ownership, how we allow for homeowners to enter into the how we allow people to enter into home ownership by protecting them and their assets and making sure that they're making smart and educated decisions. All of those things are going to be critical to you making sure that you have that leg up on anybody else. You know, there's been theories that this will have an impact on people being in the business or not. Ultimately, I think it's going to be this. Those that are willing to take the time to actually work on their skills, who actually go through and learn the things that it takes to be a good agent, because we know there are lots of agents out there who are not good. Those people will not make it. But all of you in here, because you choose to work at a brokerage like Remax, you're already one step ahead. So always go with that knowledge and know that there are so many people and tools out there to help you in just navigating this little hiccup, is what we're going to call it. In a year or two from now, the new normal will feel like it had been always this way, right? It's just right now, it all feels very fresh. It feels like a rug has been pulled under you. But once that settles and you really start to work on your craft, and some of us, we just rest on our laurels. When times are good, it's just really easy to do that. But you know what this is going to allow you to do is become a better agent. And what a better agent does is usually becomes more successful. Better agents make more money. If you're able to make yourself better, you're likely going to have a more successful career. So use this as an opportunity, challenge yourself to kind of put yourself in a different position than you probably had been. There's going to be uneasy or awkward, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be awkward conversations with your sellers or buyers. It just has to be where you're able to perfectly or imperfectly explain your value. And if there's anything I can teach you, it's, with this buyer representation class tomorrow that sounds like someone's teaching, any of these opportunities you have to listen to other people who've been doing it longer or doing it better, take that opportunity. I don't care if you've been doing it for 40 years or you've been doing it for 4 months. There's always an opportunity to make yourself better in this profession. And a lot of times it's by simply listening to how other people are doing it. I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to see. So someone asked, what if we're under contract, but this happens in July? So at that point, if anything that you're going to have, we don't know the full like ramifications of, like with the drop dead date, but anything under contract is already legally binding. So it wouldn't affect you that. What will change is on the MLS is whether or not you won't see anything about compensation. I know a lot of MLSs are already working on this, where there's going to be a field when you close out a listing. It's essentially going to look like a seller concession. So it'll show how the seller concessions were broken down. So that way, when people are doing like appraisals or looking to see how, houses were sold, you're still going to be able to probably see what kind of concessions. But again, we're going to be calling it seller concessions, not a cooperative commission. So compensation agreement, there really won't be a compensation agreement. I guess you could have one. There might be one. Again, this is where we don't know all the details. So lawyers are writing up these things. I can guarantee you all of the state associations if you're in a state where they provide the forms, they're already working on this with the federal government to try to figure out what can be and can be said in listing agreements, all those things. So we don't really know how a compensation agreement will work. Again, probably the most likely scenario is, again, you'll probably, whether it's negotiating it in one way or the other, you'll probably be writing it into the offer process. Do you know if we'll be able to ask the seller to pay agent commission for the buyer in the offer? Yes, you will. That, again, it's just like in commercial. You'll be able to, if that's something that you want to negotiate, and honestly, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, you would be able to write it maybe in a special steps. We don't know for sure, again, but that's definitely what the assumption is as far as how you would kind of negotiate. So somebody had asked, will you be able to write it into the offer? And the answer, from what we understand, is that is the way they want you to do it. If you're on mute and you want to go off mute and ask a question, I'm happy to answer those now. What I would tell you also, I'll send the links to Christy so she can send them out. Your NAR websites, you have an FAQ that has all the facts and questions that they know so far. Read them, become skilled with it, because when you sound, when you get asked a question, if you're able to articulate what the lawsuit is and how it works and why it really doesn't matter to your business and show that it really doesn't, that confidence is just going to allow for the consumer to feel confident as well. So, having a real understanding of like what this lawsuit is and what it means, it's only going to benefit you. Is this going to increase the number of FSBOs that we see? I mean, that's the other thing, guys. If you've been doing this long enough, there's already been FSBOs, right? There's already been people that do list for less and whatever you might call it. And we've always been able to navigate that. And it's never, if that's the person you're worried about, they're always going to find a way to kind of go around that number, whatever that number might be, whether it be your commission or the price of the house. We know firsthand that most of the time a FSBO on average typically loses a good amount of money that they would have gotten had they actually hired an agent. So, learning those stats too about, the difference in selling by yourself versus selling with an agent, those are things to have in your back pocket. That's how a lot of agents make money, is converting FSBOs, right?
Oh, I
So
understand.
they wouldn't be able to do that if we're able to establish that value. So will we see more? I don't know. I mean, I think you're just going to see where people feel as though they're going to test the waters on what they can and can't do. But I think in the long run, I think we all know the value is there to providing compensation to buyers agents. And that therefore is going to be one of those things that maybe at first you might see a couple people try it, but when they're not really seeing the type of success that they want, again, be the agent. And also, guys, be the agent you want to be as well, right? So when you're going, don't complain about everything to everyone and carp and all those things. Really go in there and say, this is what I'm worth, and this is how I deal with my money. And this is, I do offer, compensation to the buyer's agent, because I want to be the buyer's agent on the other side that goes, I don't have to worry about whether, this other agent is going to be having that same conversation with their seller, right? We want to have confidence in our peers. And this is where you really have to set that precedent. You are your own champion. So you have to make sure that you're having those conversations with other agents as well. If all agents are just kind of doing, wild, wild west, it's just going to be even more convoluted for the consumer. And again, their whole intent on this is to make it more pro-consumer. Just make sure you understand what pro-consumer really means. Pro-consumer would mean limiting BlackRock and the amount of times that, institutional buyers can buy up, entry-level housing and renting it out versus allowing an affordable housing to be on the market. Would be creating more laws that help minority buyers out there actually access housing. I mean, there's so many things. This was a money grab by lawyers, in my opinion, again, on this, that they were able to see an avenue that they could go down. No consumer was benefited by limiting the amount of professional advice that they can get. And as we all know, at least for me, and I assume for most of all of you, my commission has never been set. It's always negotiated from the outset. And so whatever these headlines are saying, the first thing I tell people as I go, that headline was not about me. That article is not about me. And it is not about what I do, right? That is not, no matter what you say. And again, like any profession, there are bad actors out there. We are not immune to that. There are agents out there who give us a bad name. Just don't be one of them. Have they addressed the compensation for selling of foreclosure? So no, they have not. So that's another, I think those are more steps we'll see. Somebody asked about, have they announced how they'll do offers of compensation on foreclosure house steps? Those are, I mean, that's what I'm saying. The weeds are so weedy that I would expect over the next, and even with it saying it all goes into effect mid-July, there's a lot that can happen between now and mid-July. I wouldn't stop doing your business the way you've been doing it until you see the clear writing on the wall, right? Meaning, like, I wouldn't be worried about what they're going to do from a language standpoint, but just kind of start getting yourself better in your skill set, start honing in on all those things. And really, when that change does come, of whatever form it is, you're going to be prepared, and it really won't matter to you at that point. And honestly, most of you all know this. If you're on here, you have great brokers. We meet monthly, if not more than that. I assume we'll probably be meeting more than that now. Rely on us to ask these questions, to come to us, ask us how to help you, all of those things, because that's what we're here for. We benefit when everybody benefits, and it doesn't benefit anybody for us to look as though our industry is in some type of panic. Panic is what, that pervasive thought breeds out more untruths. So the more calm and collected and confident we are about what we do as an industry, the better it looks to the outside world, and makes it kind of feel more of like, this doesn't really mean much. I was talking to friends of mine yesterday, and they were like, honestly, when I read it, I didn't really understand what would be different. And that's because they know the value I provided to them, right? So they're like, well, I would be prepared to pay you or pay whoever's, show my house. So having those conversations, again, let your circle, your sphere that you've always relied on bringing you business, to also protect your business. Make sure that they understand, why everything is the way it is, and, where the industry is going and how it might change. But tell them, here's why the value of a realtor is, and why we are going to be here tomorrow, 10 years from now, 100 years from now. We've been here for that long, and we're going to continue to be here. Okay, looks like no more questions. Again, I thank you all for jumping on. Nothing is perfect. Everything I said today, again, is more or less interpretation of what's going on. But again, I'm like every one of you. If I get bogged down in the anxiety of all this change, it stops me from being a good agent for my clients. I need to be focusing on what my clients need from me tomorrow and the next day, and let the people who are in the positions of power, the NARs, the lawyers, let them worry about some of these aspects that are kind of overwhelming you. Have confidence that you've been successful up to this point, and then therefore you're going to be continuing to be confident. I'm at President's Circle this week, which is the RPAC. Invest in RPAC. That's where your money goes, is to try to protect us in these court situations. It's really to talk to legislators and say, hey, this is screwed up what just happened. What are you going to do about it? These are these opportunities. So be a champion in those ways. Be involved in your associations. Get to know other agents. Don't think of it as a competition with every other agent around you. We are all in this together. We're all going to get through this together. And we're all going to be able to provide our value from here on out. I have no doubts in my mind. And if you at any point need that sounding board or that thing to just make you feel that confidence, call your broker, call me. We'll be here. And I expect to see you all even after the next Julys and Julys and Julys. And who knows what next thing will come at us. First it was AI, and then it was this, and then it was Zillow. There's always going to be disruptors. It's just a disruption. Just don't let it bog you down. All right, Chrissy, I think we can
Great.
stop.
Thank you, Jack. We appreciate it.
Yep, of course. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Go sell some
Bye,
real estate.
guys.
Thank you.